Hello everyone, I'm John Martinez and this is Learn Together Filmmaking. Today I'm going to be showing you how to composite this sling ring render on top of some green screen footage so that you can walk from an outside environment into an indoor one, just like in the trailer for this series. This video is going to have two parts to it. In the first part, I'm going to be showing you what settings to use in Blender for this compositing, and then the second part, I will be using Davinci Resolve 17 to actually do the compositing work. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So here we are in the Blender project that I used for the first part of this tutorial series, and I'm going to show you all of the render settings that you need in order to get this ready for compositing. First thing we need to do is make sure that our ground plane is actually going to be hidden while we're rendering. So what you could do is either come into the shader editor and just give it a transparent node, or you can come up here and just disable it in the renders and viewport. That'll hide it from us right here. Then we're going to come on over to the render properties tab and make sure that our render engine is set to cycles, GPU compute if you have one, and our noise threshold for this, I'm actually going to turn this off. I don't really want to bother with that. Set your samples for as high as you can for however much time you have to render this entire simulation, because obviously more samples will give you slightly better results. If we render it with a really low sample count, like 126 in this case, you can see how it's kind of smeary and the particles are actually more segmented. They're not really smooth lines, especially out here in the edges, compared to if we were actually to do a high sample count. So it is a little bit important to make sure that you have a relatively high sample count, but since it is going to be moving really fast, it may not be really necessary to have something extremely high. Just do whatever your hardware can handle. And maybe you want to set a time limit just to make sure that it actually stays within whatever time you have. Make sure your denoising is turned on, or you might end up with something a little bit like this, where it's going to be really segmented and just kind of a lot of dots, and you don't want that. You would rather have something that's a little bit more smeary rather than something that's just a lot of dots like this. It'll make the compositing easier if you have the denoising turned on now. Then we're going to head on over to the output properties. Make sure your resolution is how you want it. Frame rate doesn't really matter because we're going to be rendering this out to a PNG sequence. Set your frame start and end wherever you want it and come to our output. Go here and select wherever you want your files to be output. Eventually, I recommend creating a folder on top of that. So let's just create a folder on our desktop. We will call it test render in this case. Put it in there, except I always render to a PNG rather than a JPEG or movie file because I don't want to have to deal with the lossy compression that these formats create. You could use, OpenEXR or whatever, anything you want to. Just for me, I want to have lossless compression, so we'll turn this up all the way up to 90 because I have the time to render these things out. If you don't have time but you have an abundance of storage, you may want to turn the compression really far down. It'll get you a little bit faster throughput, but for me, 90 is good. You could render it with an alpha channel and then come over here to the film and then turn on transparency, and that will give you something that looks a little bit like this, which looks fine right here in Blender. But if we were to actually go ahead and just save this out, you can see that it'll create some problems for us. Let's just save this to the desktop right now and call it test image and render it with our alpha channel like that. If we save that and then look at it here, you can see that it's actually not remotely what we want it to be. And that's because each of the sparks that we've created are not going to be at full alpha strength. So whenever they show up in compositing or even just here in the photos viewer, they're not really going to show up because the alpha is really low, which doesn't show up inside of Blender. It doesn't show up as having a low alpha here. So what we need to do in order to fix this is actually disable our transparency and then come over and render it to an RGB with no alpha. And if we render that, it gives us something that looks really similar to the one that we did with the alpha channel, but this time it has a black background. And you may be thinking, well, it has a black background, so how are we gonna composite anything behind it? I'll get to that in a moment. But for now, just trust me that this is the easiest way to work with these sling rings that we're making here. So once you've got everything set here and you're happy with the way it's going to look when you render, just hit Control F12 and it will render out the entire image sequence. And we'll head back on over to Davinci Resolve and I'll show you how to composite this inside Fusion. Alright, so let's hop back over to Davinci Resolve so we can get started on the compositing. We're going to be compositing within Fusion, so first we need to convert these BRAW files into something a little bit easier to work with so we're not having to debayer every frame while we're also compositing. Our sling ring render is in 4K, so we need to convert all of our video files into 4K as well, so that we're not having to resize everything and work with resized files within Fusion, which adds both to the complexity of the node setup and to the amount of computational resources that this will require, which is already going to be quite a bit. So we want to minimize that wherever possible. What we're going to do is set some in and out points over here for these clips, and I've already trimmed them so that these clips will match the destination footage exactly, so we don't have to worry about moving anything like that. Set our in and out points, move over to the Deliver tab, and I'll just render these out to the desktop. And we're going to set this to QuickTime DNxHR 444 12-bit. So this is basically uncompressed files. We'll render at 4K so that it matches our Sling Ring render. Again, to the desktop, we want to set it to individual clips. I don't need audio for this, and use the source name right there. Add to the render queue, and we will render all these. All right, so those proxies have rendered out. So let's head on over to the Media tab, go on over to our desktop, and select the three rendered out files that we need, and move them into the transcoded footage folder. We go back over here, then we can check them and see that they are in fact 4K DNxHR 444 12-bit files. So we're good to use these and start our compositing process. So what we're actually going to do is take our green screen footage, move it into our timeline. What we could do is take our 2 background clips and our Sling Ring portal, layer them all up on top of this one, and create a compound fusion clip, but we already have everything trimmed to the exact same length, so we don't need to worry about moving anything around. So I will just go ahead and go straight into the Fusion tab from this clip. First things first, I'm going to kind of rename these things just because I want to keep a little bit organized while we're doing this. Rename that to green screen. Now that we're in here, you can see that our clip goes from frame 0 to frame 143, and we can play through it, get about 19 frames per second with nothing in it. This is why we wanted to convert it at first, because this debayering process will just slow it down a little bit more once we do that. And it loops through once we go through the entire thing. So before we get started with any of the keying work, we want to take note of a few things that are in this footage. First thing is, this green screen is obviously just something that I rigged up myself. It's not a proper green screen, just a piece of green fabric. We have a lot of extra stuff around here that we're going to have to remove as well. And when I'm close to the green screen at the very beginning, you can see that I'm casting a fairly dark shadow on there as well. The reason why I have this thing in front of the lens right here blocking all this off is because there's actually another light right back here that, when I didn't have this here, was kind of casting a lens flare across this and washing everything out, which we don't want to do any more than we have to. So I start really close to the green screen and I walk forward until I am right about here, and that's where pretty much everything after this point comes in. So we're really going to have to do 2 keys here. We're going to have this main green screen area where there's no shadows on it. It's a bit uneven from all the wrinkles in the fabric when I rigged it up, but it's going to be a lot easier to work with than this section right here where I'm close to the green screen and there's this shadow. We're going to have to create a separate key basically for this shadow area. Let's go ahead and actually get started on this section up here where I'm away from the green screen, so we can kind of get an idea on how to do all this. We're going to start by adding in a delta keyer node. When I do that, you can see it automatically adds it in here because I had the green screen node selected when I added that in. Getting started with the delta keyer is really easy. You just take your background color, click this little eyedropper tool, click and hold, and then drag it to wherever you want it. And as you're dragging it around, you can see it's actually already responding to whatever tones you're holding it over at the moment. If I bring it over the green screen right here, then you can see it's actually keyed out the green screen pretty well already. Obviously, it's not keying out any of this stuff back here, but we can solve that really easy in just a second. Once we do that, then we have these different values. Obviously, these are changing the RGB values for whatever this color is. If I wanted to fine tune it a little bit, you might be able to adjust it from here and choose different colors. And if you want to select a range of values rather than just a single point value wherever your cursor is, see, it's as I'm moving around and the fabric isn't exactly even, it's kind of flickering a little bit. So what I can do is hold down Control and drag a little bit, and that will select an average of whatever this is right here. So I can kind of move it around, find something that looks like it works pretty well. Something that keys out a lot of the green without keying in me at all. So I think we're going to go ahead and select this value right there. Then you can obviously change the pre-blur, gain, and balance. If you want to, figuring out the gain and balance is a lot easier if we actually bring up the second screen and put our delta keyer in 1. So we just type 1 on the number bar up top above the keyboard and switch this up here to alpha. So black is everywhere where the alpha is 0. And if you check down here at the bottom of your screen, as I'm moving my mouse around, you can see where the alpha is changing and what the different RGB values are. If we look here, then you can kind of see what all's going on, what's being keyed out a little bit better. If we just look at this, you might say, oh, well, the shirt is actually pretty well separated from the background, so we're not really gonna have to do a lot with that. But if we look at the dual screen mode with the alpha, you can see that it's actually not well separated at all. And you can kind of see it when I'm moving it around. You can kind of see the checkerboard pattern is in there a little bit. So what we can do with the gain and balance sliders is kind of adjust the way that it is converting this color that we've selected into what it does on the alpha channel. If we bring up the gain, then you can see that it makes all of the things with lower alpha values become even lower. If we bring it back to 0, some of these parts have a little bit of alpha to them, and then we bring up the gain and now they are down to 0. So one helpful tool that you can use when you're making all your fine adjustments is by enabling the gain and gamma sliders on this monitor, the one with the alpha channel. If we bump up the gamma, then you can see that it kind of reveals spots where the alpha maybe wasn't actually 0, where there was a little tiny amount. You can see at the bottom of the screen, the alpha is 0.03. And if we reset this slider, then if we just look at it, it looks like, oh, it's black. It's an alpha of 0 right there. Right here, it's 0.00036. And if we bump up the gamma, then you can see that, oh, it's not actually there. It's a helpful tool to help you visualize rather than needing to rely on all the values here at the bottom of the screen. And if you go the opposite way, it does the same thing in reverse. So it can reveal parts of, like, say, my face right here where the alpha maybe was not actually 1, but if we had it up here, it might look closer to 1 than it really was. Okay, so that is a lot to take in. Let's get started with the actual keying and fine tuning. First, let's reset this back to that and take a look at what we've done just by selecting our background color. You can see we've done a fairly good job of isolating myself by just using the background color. We have a lot of black around me, and although the inside, my shirt and my pants, need quite a bit of fine tuning to kind of bring that back a little bit, it's reasonably well separated. So what we can do from here is go ahead and cut out all of this extra stuff here, the boom pole, the wall, the lights. We don't want any of that. And the easiest way to get rid of all that is to use a garbage matte. So the delta keyer has a few different inputs that we can use on here. It has a clean plate, solid matte, garbage matte, and effect mask. The garbage matte is going to take anything that is within the selection and get rid of that and say, none of this is to be used, throw it all away. The solid matte does the opposite. It says that anything within the selection, just keep it, ignore the fact that it may be slightly green or whatever, use it. It's not to be keyed out. Maybe if I'm holding a green ball or something, or I have a green logo on my shirt, that's where you use a solid matte to bring it back, even though it would normally be keyed out. And the clean plate is really useful if, say, I was working on a proper green screen that wasn't going to move or anything, and I could record a little bit of footage where I wasn't in it, just walk off camera, record a little bit of footage, and then plug that into there so that it knows, hey, this is what the green screen actually looks like when there's nothing in front of it. Use this as a basis for determining where edges are and all that stuff. I don't have that with this footage, so we're just going to ignore that for now. And effect mask acts like any other mask in any other node, so we're going to kind of ignore that for now. Anyway, so we just want to get rid of all this stuff on the outside of the screen really quick and easy. And the way we're going to do that is by adding in a polygon mask, drawing a quick and dirty rectangle around the edge of our green screen, and seal it up right there. So we can connect it to the garbage matte either by left clicking and dragging it to the garbage matte input, or what you could also do is click and drag with your right click, bring it over just anywhere on top of there, and then it'll bring up this little menu to select what you want it to go to and just click garbage matte. Right now it gets rid of everything inside the circle because the selection is this area right here within that. So we'll just invert that, and now we have isolated the green screen area. Let's go back to the delta keyer on 1, and this is kind of vaguely what we look like, and it's getting a little bit better. So we'll start working on our tuning a little bit. Let's head on over to the matte tab and work with our threshold. The threshold basically just kind of alters where the cutoff point is for the white parts and the black parts. You can adjust it a little bit right there. If you bring in the low value, you can see it cleans up all of this stuff around here. If we bring in the high value, it cleans up a lot of this stuff on the inside right there. But when you do something like that, you do start to mess with fine details like the hair a little bit. For me, it's not that important because my hair doesn't have a whole lot of detail in it. There's not a whole lot that really can be thrown away, especially if you're looking at it from a big screen like this. If we come here, you can't see a whole lot of detail until you zoom in. So for me, we can see a little bit more here along the arm, a little bit of hair there. If you were dealing with an actor or actress who had a lot of flyaways, their hair was kind of sticking out a lot, then it becomes more important to do a little bit better job of making sure you maintain the detail, which is why you don't want to pull in your threshold quite a bit. You don't want to pull it in a lot because that's where it starts getting rid of a lot of the detail. For me right now, in this particular scenario, I can bump this in quite a bit and it looks all right. If we actually add in a background node, put in some random contrasting color so that it really does allow you to see kind of where the lines are, what detail is still there, you can see that it really doesn't look that good if we have it bumped in quite a bit like this. That's why you want to leave it out a little bit like that. And you can see a little bit more clearly now what all this is doing and where all we have that. So we'll just go ahead and bump in our low end a little bit. It'll just help clear it up a little bit, and bump in the high just a tiny bit here. Right now I'm looking at the alpha channel here and kind of seeing what all we're leaving in and taking out. If we play around with our high a little bit, we can get back quite a bit of detail, but we have to bring it in quite a bit before we start really getting it back. So I'm not really sure I want to mess with that a whole lot. Let's zoom in on the hair here a little bit. All right, yeah, see? We bring it in some, we can get back a lot of that in the hair. It's not all of it. And we might play with our green value a little bit and see if maybe we can get a little bit better key to begin with. I'm going to just drag up here and see see if I drag down the green in our little mix here. Just playing with the numbers and trying to find something that gets the most separation. I think that's a good number. I've got quite a bit of separation. If we zoom in, there's still quite a bit of detail. I haven't lost a whole lot in the hair. The shirt is a mess. The pants are a mess, but we can work on that later. We'll use a separate delta keyer for that. Back on over to the matte, we can do a little bit more with our clean foreground and clean background. So this just says, if we use the clean foreground, what it's going to do is say, this point right here is surrounded by a lot of white. So maybe just bump this up to white as well. It's a really simple control. You can use it just to kind of get rid of isolated black spots like that. Again, you don't want to go too far. If you go too far, then you kind of end up doing weird things. You maybe add in a little bit of white where you don't want to. So let's bring it back down, and I think that's a good number right there. And do a similar thing with the clean background. We want to get rid of these white spots within our background right there. So just a small amount, very tiny amount. If we do that, and we can check it with our gamma, see what we've got left here. So So if we do this, if we bring up the gamma, again, we're revealing where there's white that maybe hasn't quite been gotten rid of. Just tweak it a little bit more in the clean background. I think that's really good. We've kind of really gotten rid of most of the white around me. If we go the other way with the gamma, look for things that are maybe being revealed. So there's a little bit of black right there that's kind of being revealed in my face, which you can kind of see it right there. Maybe YouTube's compression won't allow you to see this. There's a little bit of purple in my face right there. I could tweak this a little bit. That I have to bring it up really high though for that. So I think I'm going to leave that. Maybe we'll fix it later, or maybe when I put the actual footage behind it, you won't even be able to see it. The whole process is a lot of refinement. We're going to be going back and tweaking these values probably later, working with everything that we need to for that. All right, this gets us a pretty good key for kind of around my head area. The skin tones are all looking really good. Now we just need to deal with the shirt and pants, which are not going to be fun to deal with. Actually, also these corner parts right there and a little bit around there. We can get rid of these corner elements really easy in this footage because I don't, come into the corners at all. So we can just actually adjust our polygon mask a little bit. Bring that in there. And just kind of, mask around wherever I am. And we want to get rid of our shape animation. It's a very important thing I forgot to mention. We will remove the key because the default for any polygon masks in Resolve or in Fusion is to make them animated to begin with. There we go, remove polygon line. That's what we wanted to do, is to animate them automatically, which is normally a helpful tool, and it may be a helpful tool here if I wanted to mask out a particular object that is moving in the scene. But, I'm just gonna look at it, make sure I never intersect the mask at all. I want to make sure I'm inside the entire time. All right, that looks pretty good. Look at our delta keyr's good. And let's also bump this in a little bit right there and hide that. Hooray, we have a mask. It works pretty decently. All right, now that we've got that, what we need to do is work on the shirt and pants. So that way they're not transparent and they're keyed in and solid like the rest of me. The way we're going to do that is by using another delta keyer node and then hooking that into the solid matte. So let's go ahead and just duplicate this delta keyer with Control C, come over here and Control V, connect our green screen footage to the input, and now we will use this one instead, both screen 1 and 2 right now. So what we need to do is take our little polygon node, go ahead and hook that up to our garbage matte. And that way we don't have to deal with all the extra stuff around the outside as well. Bring that over there, and we'll have it like that. Okay, now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and actually rename this one to solid matte key. What we want to do here is to create a different key that is more tolerant of the differences down here in the pants area, but doesn't interfere with the edges that we've established with our main keyer. So we're going to come into our matte section and pull down our high like that. And as you can see, it gets rid of all the black spots in here. We can go in and check our gamma, make sure that looks good. I think that looks pretty good. We have done that. We check our gamma and nothing is really kind of slipping through at all. But if we connect it to our solid matte right here, you'll be able to see that it actually kind of affects the edges a little bit, the details that we have along here. So right now it's connected. If we go ahead and disconnect that, then you can see it pulls in a little bit, and we don't want it to push out a little bit when we connect in here. We don't want it to do this where it pulls that out there, because if we look at that a little bit, you can see it's pulling in a bit too much on the outside, and when we end up playing through, there's going to be a lot of noise in here. So to avoid To avoid having it affect our edges so much, we're going to use this erode dilate right here. Let's bring our solid matte key back into monitors 1 and 2 and take the erode dilate. And what this does is it takes whatever our alpha channel is, and if we bring it down and erode it, it shrinks it down a little bit like that. And if we dilate it, it just expands it like that. So what we're going to do is just erode it enough so that it really wouldn't be affecting our key very much, for our original key, that is. Bring it in just enough so that it's not really doing anything like that. We can compare the two actually. So right now in monitor 1, I have our solid matte key, and in monitor 2 is our delta keyer, our original delta keyer. If we compare the alpha for the two of them, bring them back out like that, then you can kind of see how this erode dilate is affecting it relative to that. So we just want to bring it in until it's no longer affecting that. I think that's probably pretty good right there. And now we have a solid inner part right there and not an expanded mask from our having brought down the high threshold right there. So that looks pretty good actually. If we come back over to our merge one right here, turn off the alpha channel, and we can kind of see that the purple areas aren't really peeking through so much. It's still a little bit on the face right there. If we look right here, you can see there's a little bit of purple on my face. If I connect our solid matte, most of it disappears. We're just left with a little tiny bit right there. And I'm gonna leave that for now and just check it later. Once we get our actual background footage in there, it may not be so apparent. So that actually all looks pretty good right now. Let's get rid of our nodes real quick. Just go to one monitor and play through it and see what that looks like. We're looking right now for anything that looks a bit weird, specifically like around the hair, if there's any noise. Just bring our in point there and our out point to there. All right, so we're just playing through this, looking for anything weird, any kind of noise, jittering really is what we're looking for. Along the edges, making sure the edges all look good. We're not seeing anything. Specifically around the hair. You know, if you zoom in, you can see that there is in fact some jittering. But if we are out here, I'm pretty happy with that. I'm not too concerned. If I want to get rid of that a little bit, I can go here and maybe blur the edges just a little bit. Let's do that and see how that changes it a little bit. Not that much. Small amounts of blur, small amount. See what that looks like. It's not really doing a whole lot for me. Bring in our alpha channel and take a look at that and see what our blur is doing here. We just want to do a little bit just to kind of get rid of those edges somewhat and get rid of that noise, make it a little bit less apparent. All right, that looks pretty decent. All right, so we've done that, and let's start thinking about our little shadow there at the very beginning. Let's bring our in and out points all the way out. Come back to the beginning. If we do this, you can see there's a little bit of the boom mic up there, so we can just adjust our mask that we're using a little bit. The boom mic's gone. Let's play through and make sure that still looks all right. Skip in. And now that's cutting me out a little bit. So we actually do want to animate this mask a little bit. Let's go to our original footage, go to our mask. Let's see. So that's where our mask was. Let's find where the boom pole is no longer in there. Right there is a good place. So we will animate right here, add a keyframe for the original mask right there. That mask is good for the entire shot. And then go back and just add in another keyframe where the boom pole is not in there. Let's play through that, and there we go. The boom pole is cut out now, and we just have to deal with this shadow right here that we are creating. What we're going to do for that is just create a garbage matte to apply on top of the garbage matte that we already have. So we're just going to add in another delta keyer node. I'm not using the same one because we're going to have to use a different background color for this. Come into our delta keyer, add in that. Let's put this on 1 and 2. and let's add in our shadow. I think that's pretty decent. It gets rid of most of that, but not all of it. All right, so we can just come here and get rid of most of the shadow right there. All right, we got rid of most of the shadow by doing it that way. Let's go into our matte and clear it up just a wee bit more. Now right here, it's going to be very important that we have good lines along this edge right here, not necessarily along here. If we need to, we can just mask this out. I'm gonna try and keep it good, but we just need to make sure we have good edges along both sides. Zoom in a little bit and clear up the background some right there. See how that looks? It's pretty all right. You can see there's a bit of noise right there, but I'm not concerned about that. In fact, it's down by the watch. Yeah, I'm not concerned about that. It's really small. It's gonna be really fleeting. You know, if you wanna clean that up a little bit better, you can mess with that. Just gonna erode this a little tiny bit, and that'll help some with that as well. All right, so if we just connect our garbage matte key into the garbage matte input of this node, you can see it's going to get rid of me, and that's because the original garbage matte that we have is going to be black on the inside, and everything that's white is going to be discarded. But when we're using our delta keyer, it's kind of doing the opposite. You know, it's working like the original delta keyer, and everything that's white is to be kept. Everything that's black, we want to get rid of. We'll fix that by going into our end delta keyer here, going to the mask tab and invert garbage mask. So now we've done that, but unfortunately, it is also getting rid of the pants and the shirt. Basically everything that's kind of less than white here is now no longer a solid white color, even though we have our solid matte that says, yes, it should be, keep all of that. That is because the garbage matte kind of takes priority over the solid matte. The way we're going to fix this is by using another delta keyer node to act as a solid matte for our garbage matte delta key node. So let's go ahead and rename this one to garbage matte. And we're going to make another one of these, but specifically for this one. So let's put this one on 1 and 2. First, what we're going to do is use our polygon that we've created as a garbage matte for this one. So let's go ahead and go there, right click, drag, and select garbage matte. We're basically kind of recreating these two nodes, but for this one, so that we can use it on the regular delta keyer. Let's add a delta keyer here, bring in our green screen. Let's go ahead and select that one. We're going to select the shadows again, because this is kind of all for the shadows. Select a decent spot for that. That's pretty good. We're going to do what we did for our original solid matte key and push it really hard to get all of the white in here so that we can kind of have a good interior, and then just erode away the edges so that we're not, you know, expanding it a little bit too far. So we've selected for our shadows. We're going to balance the gain a little bit, get rid of a lot of that. And let's check our gamma a little bit, bump it down just a tiny bit more, head into our matte. We're going to use our low threshold to kind of get rid of any straggling little bits of black in here. We don't want any of that. Bump it up just a tiny bit more and clean up our background a little bit. All right, that looks pretty good. Then we are going to bring in our high threshold quite a bit, and that's going to solidify kind of all this interior part. You can see it's still not perfect. There's still going to be some stuff that gets cut out. We can fix that hopefully with a little bit of clean foreground. Okay, the inside portion all looks pretty good, but we have a little bit of an issue here in the leg area. There's a little bit of shadow that we don't want to do, so we'll just bump up the threshold a little bit. And there's not a whole lot we can do with that. So what we're going to do is, first of all, connect our polygon as a garbage matte for this one. We want all of that there. And then we're going to erode this pretty heavily, because again, we don't want this to add in some edges or whatever that shouldn't be there. We don't want it to create some stuff that shouldn't be there. So let's go ahead and go over to our regular garbage matte. We will add this node here as a solid matte. And as you can see, it brings back all of that stuff right there, which unfortunately includes that. But if we head over here, you know, it's a small thing. We might be able to fine tune this by going into our, adjusting our RGB here. I think that got rid of it pretty good. Unfortunately, it did not actually get rid of it there. So let's bump up our gain some. It's not helping me. That is because our garbage matte is also there we go. Hopefully that kind of made everything look a little bit cleaner. There's a little bit of a thing there. Let's play through frame by frame though and see what. You know what, I think that's probably going to be all right. It's really small. If we go through, bring in our end frame. Only do 30 frames. Let's see how it's reacting. If we come here, you can kind of see it's doing a little bit of weird stuff right there. So I think this whole little shadow section at the beginning is pretty decent. If we look at our alpha, you can see that there's a little bit of a flickering right here around the belt buckle. Right there. And that'll be super easy to get back in. We'll just add an ellipse, bring this into here as a solid matte, and center it around there. Let's go ahead and make it a lot smaller. All right, that looks good. I think it's fixing our issue with the belt buckle. There's no longer any holes. Get rid of that. Then, where was it? Right there. All right. Yeah, that looks good. We'll add that back in as a solid matte. Gets rid of that. It looks good. I can't see really any other issues. Play through that. Ooh, okay, wait. Looks like there's a little bit of a thing right there. It is really hard to see where that is. So let's go over here to our merge node. It's within our little circle thing, and the reason it's still getting keyed out is because it's probably something within the actual garbage matte node or within the solid matte that's not adding it back in. I don't know, we can just add this in as a solid matte here and see if that brings it back. Go here and pull that down. So that's where the hole is. Let's take our ellipse and bring it in as a solid matte for our solid matte node. And that gets rid of it right there. Small thing. I really can't tell the difference here, but it's there for when we need it. And it's not interfering with anything that's actually going to be happening. It's not going to, because the range of motion of the original footage is so limited, I'm not really walking around a whole lot. It's not going to kind of add in anything that shouldn't already be there. You can see it stays firmly within me the entire time. It's not going to cause a problem. We don't need to animate that at all. We have our key pretty good. That means we can be done with this alpha channel right here. Reset that, and we can be done with our gain and gamma. We can start working now on color and eventually putting in our footage on top of that. What is that? It's eroding away way too much is what it is. great. Why? What is that? I'm not sure what that is. It's that. It's not. All right, now that we've done that, we can start working on color a little bit. First thing we're going to do is get rid of the second monitor. We don't need that anymore. We can just stay on on monitor 2. The Delta keyer automatically has some spill suppression that it uses to get rid of some green light that may be reflecting off of the green screen onto me. More useful for situations where I'm like surrounded by a much larger green screen and there's a lot more light bouncing off of it and into the room in a little bit. On this particular footage, there's not really a whole lot of the green spill happening right here because the area on which it bounces is so small and the room itself actually is it's still green. The room is still green a little bit actually, not the same color of green, and I've kind of accounted for that in the white balance of the camera, which means I've kind of fixed it on my skin as well. So in this case, the spill suppression actually doesn't do a whole lot for this footage, and it's not really what we want. It kind of can sometimes create some weird artifacts on the footage. So let's go into our merge node as well, and let's see what we're dealing with. So you can see these little much darker dots kind of around in the hair, especially getting it some in the shirt as well. And also a weird thing is you can sometimes get these weird lines, kind of like moire on footage and everything from the spill suppression that we don't want, obviously. But it's not caused by any sort of resolution mismatch or anything like that. It's actually caused by the spill suppression that is automatically in the Delta keyer. The setting that it uses for this automatically is this replace mode. The default is soft color, but we can change it to none or source and just see how it's affecting our footage. You can see right here along the edge on the default of soft color, it's a little bit dark right there. If we change it to source, what it's going to do is basically turn it off and kind of just say, well, whatever colors are coming in from the green screen footage, just use that. Don't do anything to it. But there's still a lot of noise here in the lower sections. So what we kind of have to do is go into all of these, go into our matte node and change them all to source. They may or may not affect it when you do that, and just see how it's kind of changing all that as we do it. And we also have to come into the mask tab as well. And there's another right there for soft color. Change that to source, and that cleans it all up nicely. Now that gets rid of all the noise and any sort of weird patterns that are here as well. You can see on the shirt, it introduces a lot of contrast sort of to it. The pattern becomes really pronounced. If we change it to source, it softens it out a little bit. It's actually more pronounced if you do it with the original B-raw footage, but this transcoded footage, less noticeable. Anyways, the solid replace mode for this particular footage, I am just going to change everything to source, so that way it's not doing its own calculations in the background, and that way it's not doing its own calculations in the background, and I can control everything myself, especially since the footage didn't really have a whole lot of spill to work with anyways, and the footage that I'm going to be putting in the outside nature stuff behind me is going to have a little bit of green in it already, so it would actually kind of match a little bit if there was some green. We've disabled the spill, the colors look decent, it's time to start compositing this into our actual footage. So let's get rid of our merge and background, connect this back over to our media out, and start working with footage. All right, so what we're gonna do is go over to the media pool, go into the transcoded footage, and add in our clips. We'll rename this one to inside, and bring this one in and rename it to outside. We'll go ahead and add in our portal as well, rename that one to portal. Remember, just labeling things to keep it a bit more organized. Then we will start compositing. The first thing we can do is just combine our outside and inside footage. So we'll go ahead and drag this on top of that like that. Right now, it currently has the foreground to be the outside footage. We can switch between the two by hitting Control T. So what we want is for our outside footage to be on the foreground and the inside footage to be in the background. That way we can take this background footage right here and kind of layer on this outside that we have here on top of that, and then put the portal on top of that to hide the transition between the two. Because the way we're going to transition between the two is just by using an ellipse mask. And we'll go ahead and put that in right now just so you can kind of see what it's going to do. That's kind of what it's going to do, and you know, wherever our portal is going to be, that's where we're going to position the mask and add a little bit of a soft edge to further hide that transition. But for now, let's just add our portal on top of that. So let's take the portal, drag it to the output node of this one, and it'll automatically create a merge node on top of that. So if we do that, you can just see that the portal is sitting on top of the footage with a black background, and there's no transparency, so you can't see any of the footage that we have behind it. The reason we're doing it this way is because if you try and export your frames as like PNGs with transparency, then they all show up really, really faint and you can't see them at all. And the only way to get them so that you can see them is just to layer on like 20 copies of it, which, you know, it's a lot of resources that you don't really want to do. So the way we kind of get around this, there's two solutions that you can use for this. Solution number one is that you can use this that we've already exported, and since we're exporting it with a black background, we can just use a Luma keyer. Put it between the two and then mess with our values here and kind of bring down the high so we can bring as much as we want. And what we want to avoid is bringing in the black parts right here. We want to bring it low enough so that we can see the particles really well without bringing in a whole lot of that black background. There we go. I think that looks pretty good. And you know, you can blur it a little bit if you want to. Just kind of hide the edges a little bit. I think I'll add a little bit of blur if we look in here. Just a very small amount to keep them from having edges. You don't want it a lot because, again, if you do that, for one thing, it makes them disappear, but it also brings in that black background that we want to get rid of. All right, so now we have that. It's feeding through with an alpha channel. If we come over to Luma here, you can see how it's actually behaving with the alpha right there. All right, so now we have that, so we can kind of start to get an idea of where we want this ellipse mask to be. We want it to occupy the whole footage, so let's go ahead and put it back in. And we want our background to only occupy this space right here that our ring is, where the transition point is. So we'll kind of vaguely center this on there and spread it out so that it lines up with the edge of our ring. There we go. Add a little bit of a soft edge to it so that it hides the transition some. And maybe let's expand it just a little bit more. It's a pretty forgiving process, especially once we add in our glow effects and anything like that. But one thing you do have to keep in mind, since we did add a little bit of instability to this ring with our displace modifier in Blender, it's not a perfect circle. It's gonna have a little bit of waviness to it, so you're gonna have to keep track of that and make sure it's not accidentally revealing a little bit of the transition here or having it poke out from behind a little bit. Just something to keep in mind. I think it looks pretty good right now. So from here, we can start to add our footage on top of this and put, me in front of all this so that I can be walking around out there. Take our delta key here and drag the output of that to the output of our merge, and let's view that. Here I am standing in front of a portal to another place. Now we can start thinking about color and our edges and making sure everything blends and the overall look that we're going to be going for. Right now, our portal looks really good. It's nice and saturated and bright and all that good stuff that we want. But our footage is not. It's very flat footage. The reason is because I was shooting in Blackmagic RAW, which is a flat profile. It's linear. Normally, I would come over here, go to the Blackmagic design, and turn on our view LUT to say video like that. But since we have our portal, which is in the RGB color space, it's going to completely mess that up. So we have to leave this off for the entire thing, which means in order to get the footage to actually match the color space of our portal, we're going to have to use some color space transforms. So what we're going to use for that is the ACES transform node. So what this is going to do is take our input footage, we're going to select whatever color space it's in, and it's going to convert this into the ACES color space. You can read up on it if you want. I'll probably make a video on it in the future, but what it's going to do is convert it into the ACES color space, and then on the output side, we can select an output transform and have it output to whatever color space we want to. So if we have no input transform and no output transform, it's not going to do anything. It's going to put it in here, do nothing, and put it right back out again. It's going to look exactly the same as if we were looking at it from here. But if we select the input transform as Blackmagic Design Film, then it's going to look really weird. And that's because it's converting our Blackmagic RAW color space footage. It's going to transform it into the ACES color space, which covers a really wide range of values. So whatever we have here, it's going to actually end up falling really towards the bottom of that. That's why it ends up looking a lot darker for the most part. Then we want to take our output transform and put this into the Rec 709 color space. We could use sRGB, but Rec 709 is really technically more appropriate, even though they're quite similar. So we'll select that, and now it looks actually pretty decent. It's got a lot of saturation. The contrast is pretty good. We're looking at if you look at the values down here at the bottom, we're getting some pretty low values there. Getting a lot of like these specular parts up here. Looks pretty good. I think it looks like a pretty good image. Take that and we will put that into our merge that we have here. Again, this is all the footage is really flat and our portal is really contrasty and nice and saturated. We put this in there. That looks a lot better. We're going to copy that and paste another version of it between our footage that we have. Remember, this is just the plain footage and the portal, which we have right here. So let's go ahead and add this in here. Now this all got really saturated and it didn't affect our portal at all. Now everything's kind of coming together a little bit. That looks a little bit better and we can start actually working on things. First thing I'm going to do is actually move our background, our outside area a little bit, because even though when I was filming this, I set everything up and tried to get everything exactly the same so that it would look proper, I just think it would look a little bit better if it was a little bit higher up. So we're going to take our center and just shift it up a little bit and zoom in a little bit so that we're not having a little bit of black area right here. So we can come on over to our delta key and start working on our fringe to make it match the footage a little bit better. After all, the background where I'm coming out of and all the portal, it's really bright. So we want to make it look like I'm actually being backlit by something that's really bright. The outside coming into the inside, which is like where it's exposed for if it was an actual real thing that was happening. So what we'll do is take our fringe gamma. If you crank it all the way up, what happens? Absolutely not very much. That is because our fringe size is 0, so anything that we're doing here isn't affecting that. So our fringe gamma is currently all the way up at the maximum value, but nothing's happening because the fringe size is 0. If we start increasing that slowly, you can kind of start to see along the edge, you know, the shoulders around there, a little bit on the skin some. You can see how it's getting really bright. And here we just kind of got to figure out what looks good. Maybe pull down the gamma some, bump up the fringe. I think that looks pretty good. We're being backlit a little bit. There's a little bit of light spill over my shoulder. The hair, we'll do something about that in a moment. I'm not too crazy about the hands though. Let's actually back that off a little bit. Maybe back off the gamma. There we go. That looks pretty good. If we just reset that and see what it looks like before and after, you can see I just go between the two. You can see how it's actually changing it. I actually look like I'm being backlit by the environment. And we can also change the color of it a little bit, make it a little bit yellow because I'm being backlit by this really bright, you know, yellowish sparky thing right here. So let's actually, let's see, let's take our blue yellow here and adjust that some. Little subtle things here. We don't want to push it really far, but just add a little bit of yellow to that. Maybe pull out a little bit of green. Maybe not. Just play with the colors here and trying to figure out what looks good. Bump a little bit of the red cyan balance as well. All right, I think the fringe looks pretty good. We're getting a decent light spill off of it. It looks like I'm actually being lit by something. Maybe not. I back that off a little bit. It's a little bit yellow. All right, I think that looks pretty good. We can work on a few other things now. Let's do a little bit of color correction for our inside area right here. Make that, move all these over a little bit so I have a little bit more room to work. Let's add a color corrector node right here. And I want to make this a little bit brighter because, you know, this is a really bright ring, but the room is not being lit a whole lot. All right, so let's bump the gamma a little bit, make it a little bit brighter. Yeah, let's actually pull down the brightness, bump up the gain a little bit. It'll add a little bit of contrast as well. And this is, again, just, you know, trying to figure out what would this ring be doing to this room. It would make it a lot brighter, give it a little bit of a yellowish, orangey cast to it. And I am going to change the color of the ring a little bit because I'm actually not quite satisfied with it. I think the room probably looks pretty decent. Now let's come over to our ring and do some color correcting on that. Bring that here. And I want to make it a little bit more orange rather than yellow so much. Bump up the saturation a little bit. And if we bump up the contrast, it's going to affect everything that came before it as well. This happens whenever you're working on footage that has an alpha channel and you start affecting things within the luminance rather than the chrominance. The way we'll fix this is by coming over to our options and pre-divide post multiply. So this is going to limit our color correction to only the values which are actually part of our portal. We do that and now it's only affecting the portal. So we can come back to our correction and see what our contrast is doing. It's making it a little bit brighter. Just add a small amount of that. And I want to add a little bit more saturation and rotate the hue a little bit, make it more orange. There we go. And bring the contrast back down. I think that looks pretty good. All right, we will now work on the color corrector for our outside as well. One final color corrector, put that in there. I want to kind of match it to me right here, which means we need to match our black levels adjust the sky so that its brightness kind of matches what we are seeing on, the spill on me. So let's take our black levels. If we look right now, there's nothing that's really that black within our environment. Even in the shadow areas, like this dark area right here isn't quite black. So let's go ahead and bump our contrast just a little bit. Again, we need to pre-divide, post-multiply. And look at that again. So just a tiny bit of contrast. Let's take our lift, bring that down a little bit, and brighten it up because this is a bright day out there. There we go. I think that looks pretty good. It's a little more punchy right there. Matches our black levels a little bit more, makes more sense. How many more ways can I say that it looks all right? Just 2 final steps before we are wrapped up here. We need to add in a little bit of blur. As you can see, I am perfectly in focus, which I should be, but the background is, while it's slightly out of focus, it's not as out of focus as I would think that it would be. Even though I tried to leave all the camera settings the same, like the aperture and the focus distance, it still ended up I had to close down the aperture a little bit, which increased our depth of field, which then means it's not as blurry as it should be, as if I were filming it with the portal and everything. And that includes, the ring as well. It's not really blurry, it's pretty sharp. And the background as well is not as blurry as I would like it to be. So we're just going to add in a couple of blur nodes, especially for the background that is not the portal, but the outside and the inside room as well. I'm going to add a blur for those, and then a separate blur to kind of control the overall blur for everything that's behind me. You could use the actual lens blur node if you wanted to for something that's technically more accurate, but as far as I'm concerned, the just default blur node is decent enough. So we've added it in. The default value is 1, and you can kind of already see that it has a pretty significant effect, especially on the high frequency detail within the trees and everything. Those get blurred out really nicely. I'm actually going to bump that down a little bit. That's pretty strong. There you go. Just something really subtle like that. Make sure it's not perfectly in focus, and then we will copy that, paste it after that, after the merge node, that is after the portal, and it'll do something similar here. Our portal is now a little bit blurred out, blends with the background a little bit better, and that looks pretty good. One last thing, glow. We're going to add a little bit of glow because we want to have some kind of lens artifacts in here. Remember how I was talking about with the green screen, how there was a light right here that was causing a little bit of lens flare and everything that I didn't want for our green screen footage, but for our final footage, the final composited render, I do want that in there because that's what would really happen in the real world. So we'll go ahead and add our glow node in here, but this glow node isn't the right one. I actually should be adding the other one. There are 2 different glow nodes that use different ways of calculating it, and they have a little bit of different settings as well. I like this one more because it just has more controls in it. I don't know, it might be a little bit more computationally intense. What this allows especially is this shine threshold, which allows us to change what brightness value of the image actually gets affected by the glow node. It kind of acts like a luma keyer, but integrated within this one node. I like to use this output selection here to kind of see what it is that's actually glowing. Let's just look at the glow node, not the merge. So we can see that the ring is definitely getting some of that glow effect, but it also looks like our sky is as well. So if we raise this, we can kind of get rid of the sky. We can make our ring actually a little bit brighter to kind of compensate for that, kind of overpower the brightness of that. So let's add in just a little bit of gain to that. So let's head back into our glow node and see what that looks like. Our threshold Now you can see when we raise it up, it's not affecting the sky really, but it is getting the ring some. Let's go back into our glowing image and see what that's doing for us. If we just toggle it off and on, you can see how it's adding a little bit of fog to what we're doing. We can improve this a little bit by adding a little bit of color to our fog. Let's make it a yellowish color like that. And it's kind of just tinting the glow that we've added a little bit. We can control the spread of it. What I have done sometimes is actually use 2 glow nodes and have one with a very low spread so that it's kind of just around this brightest ring portion like that, and bump down gain quite a bit. Just change all of that. Bump down the opacity maybe. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to keep it relatively spread out like this. Really subtle. You don't want to go too far with that because it's easy to make it look fake. There we go. Let's check back here. Since we've added the glow before the merge node though, all of the glow that we're adding isn't affecting, it's not coming on top of me. So we toggle it on and off, you can see it's not actually affecting me at all. I'm just kind of separated from the rest of that. So what we can do is see how it works when we put it on here. If we do it now, you can see that the glow is actually kind of coming on over on top of me. Actually, just look at the shiny regions. Here we go. This is a much better representation. So this is showing us everything that should be glowing. And then that is what is actually getting affected by this node and then is outputting it on top of that. Since we have it so that all of the sparks around my head are glowing, but not me, myself, then when we output the glow, it's kind of layering that on top of me and leading to this little kind of fogginess or lens effects sort of on top of my face. We toggle it on and off. You can see how it's actually layering that on top of me. And this is how you composite a sling ring portal on top of some green screen footage. If you ever have to composite it on top of footage that was shot without a green screen, obviously, rather than having all of these delta keyers, you'll have to use a polygon mask and do the hard manual labor of rotoscoping everything out. I do not envy you if that is the case. Anyways, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it and found some useful information in here, whether it be green screen tutorials, compositing, or just whatever else comes in here. Maybe a fusion tutorial, I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you want to see any more Marvel tutorials like this or anything else you've seen in a movie, and I'll see what I can do about that. I'm John Martinez, and this has been Learn Together Filmmaking.